In an upscale banking institution located in central Chicago, an African-American gentleman approaches the service counter seeking a standard cash withdrawal. However, the bank employee barely acknowledges his presence before dismissing his request with a cold, unwelcoming attitude. Within minutes, security personnel are summoned, and he finds himself being escorted out as though he were a common thief, while Caucasian patrons freely complete their transactions involving even larger sums without any scrutiny whatsoever. What this financial institution fails to realize is that they have just expelled the wrong individual. Once his real identity comes to light, he will demonstrate exactly who wields the true authority in this establishment. Marcus Bennett entered the Bennett Financial Branch precisely at 9 o'clock in the morning. The transparent entrance doors opened effortlessly, permitting the fresh dawn breeze to drift inside alongside him. Morning sunlight poured through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, creating brilliant golden patterns across the gleaming tile flooring. The banking facility hummed with the subdued energy of commerce. Employees dressed in professional attire moved purposefully behind service stations, customers formed orderly queues awaiting their turn, and the gentle sound of service notifications chimed at consistent intervals. This was a perfectly functioning operation, exactly as Marcus had imagined it when he established this institution from nothing. However, on this particular day, he wasn't present in his capacity as chief executive officer. No boardroom meetings, no media interviews, no major financial negotiations. Simply a standard withdrawal of $15,000 from his personal banking account. Something any account holder should accomplish without complications. He hadn't chosen to wear his tailored business suit or luxury timepiece, instead opting for a crisp pale blue dress shirt, tan slacks, and spotless athletic shoes. His appearance was modest, fitting naturally among the morning clientele. As he ventured deeper into the building, his observant gaze noticed a gentleman at the service counter, middle-aged, Caucasian, wearing a dark gray business jacket. The bank employee smiled pleasantly while she tallied clean bundles of currency, passing them across without pause. Marcus glimpsed the transaction amount on the receipt as the customer pivoted, $20,000. The patron secured the funds, expressed his gratitude with a nod, and walked toward the entrance without facing any examination, questioning, or interference. Marcus released a measured breath, his facial muscles tensing briefly before he relaxed them again. He had witnessed this scenario previously, experienced it personally. Yet today, perhaps more than any other time, he was committed to ensuring his own financial institution wasn't perpetuating this same form of unspoken discrimination. Maintaining a composed expression, he proceeded toward the teller stations. The waiting line was brief, and soon he stood before a fair-haired woman wearing a rigidly pressed dark blue blazer. Her identification badge displayed Amy Carter. Unlike the previous interaction he had just observed, Amy provided no welcoming smile. She scarcely glanced in his direction before reaching under her workstation and pushing a clipboard toward him. "Complete this form," she stated without emotion, her voice mechanical and distant. No greeting whatsoever. No courteous pleasantries. Marcus examined her expression momentarily before directing his attention to the document, a standard withdrawal form. He had no objection to completing it. Procedures existed for valid reasons, though something about her attitude seemed problematic. Nevertheless, he kept his composure, extracting a pen from his pocket and rapidly filling in the necessary details. When finished, he returned the clipboard to her position along with his driver's license. She accepted the slip but didn't bother examining the identification. Rather, she glanced at the requested amount and immediately pushed the form back across the counter. "We cannot process this transaction," she declared curtly, crossing her arms. Marcus furrowed his brow, his fingertips touching the rejected paperwork. "I'm sorry." Amy remained expressionless. "We don't handle substantial cash withdrawals of this nature." His forehead creased with confusion. "I just observed that gentleman leave with $20,000 in cash." He gestured toward the exit where the previous customer was now stepping onto the bustling sidewalk. "You didn't hesitate for even a moment with him." Amy's mouth formed a tight line. That situation was different. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone remaining calm yet firm. Different in what way exactly? Amy looked away for the first time, though not from discomfort, more like annoyance. Instead of providing an answer, she turned her head partially, her eyes shifting toward the glass-enclosed office at the rear, where Victoria Sanders, the branch manager, stood watching. And in that instant, Marcus understood completely. Marcus followed Amy's line of sight toward the glass-walled office at the back of the banking facility, where Victoria Sanders stood with her arms folded, observing their interaction with barely concealed suspicion. A woman in her mid-40s dressed in an impeccably fitted business suit, she possessed the sharp, analytical appearance of someone who had already reached her conclusion well before she would pretend to evaluate the evidence. The moment their gazes connected, she provided a subtle nod, nearly invisible, yet sufficient. Amy's posture became more rigid, her confidence reinforced by her supervisor's silent endorsement. When she turned back toward Marcus, something colder had entered her eyes. She exhaled sharply as though she were already weary of their conversation. "I explained to you," she said, tapping the document still positioned between them, "we cannot complete this transaction." Marcus inhaled slowly and deliberately, maintaining control of his patience. "And I'm requesting an explanation for why." Amy didn't respond right away. Instead, she drummed her polished fingernails against the counter surface in a slow, intentional pattern, as though delaying deliberately. Eventually, she sighed while tilting her head. "It's simply irregular," she said, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness people employed when pretending reasonableness. "A cash withdrawal of this magnitude, it raises red flags." Marcus allowed the term to linger in the space between them, weighty and purposeful. Suspicious. He felt it settle into his chest, into his very bones, the way it always did when individuals like Amy used polite language to disguise more sinister motivations. He recognized this pattern. He had navigated it throughout his entire life, maneuvering through unwritten regulations that determined who received trust without question and who was forced to prove repeatedly that they even deserved to occupy certain environments. "You didn't appear suspicious when he performed the identical transaction," Marcus stated, his voice steady and controlled. He didn't need to gesture. They both knew his reference. "So explain to me, Amy. What's the distinction?" A flicker of something crossed her features, a split-second hesitation before she regained composure, shaking her head. "Sir, I don't create these policies." Marcus released a quiet, mirthless laugh. "You don't create the policies," he repeated. "But you certainly understand how to enforce them selectively." Amy bristled, her lips compressing into a narrow line. "I need to summon my manager," she announced abruptly, her tone sharp. She didn't wait for his response before turning quickly and disappearing into the back office. Marcus remained motionless. His fingers rested against the cool counter surface, tapping absently in rhythm with his steady heartbeat. The atmosphere within the bank had transformed, subtle yet perceptible, as though the environment itself had detected the tension brewing beneath the surface. He could sense attention focused on him, other tellers stealing glances in his direction, customers shifting uneasily, as if they sensed something developing but preferred not to become involved. Several feet away, a woman, Caucasian, in her early 50s, observed him with thinly disguised curiosity. Lisa Parker, according to the name tag attached to her handbag. She stood near the customer service area, hands clasped over the strap as if debating whether to speak. Marcus briefly met her gaze, and for a moment she wavered before offering a small, uncertain smile. He didn't reciprocate it. Not because he harbored anger toward her specifically, but because he understood how these situations unfolded. People like Lisa observed. They whispered. They noticed when incidents like this occurred, but they seldom took action. The back office door opened with a swing. Victoria Sanders emerged, her heels creating sharp sounds against the tile, her expression unreadable. Amy followed closely behind, her chin raised slightly, wearing the subtle smirk of someone who knew they had support. Victoria stopped before the counter, smoothing the front of her blazer as she studied Marcus. "Good morning, sir," she said. Her voice was polished and professional, the type of tone reserved for managing complaints from problematic customers. "I understand you're attempting to make a substantial withdrawal today." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "That's correct." Her smile appeared polite but lacked warmth in her eyes. "Unfortunately, we maintain specific security measures for transactions of this magnitude." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Security measures?" "Yes," she replied smoothly. "For the protection of our customers and our personnel, we must exercise additional caution with high-value withdrawals." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his stance shifting slightly. "So what exactly does that entail for me?" Victoria offered a sympathetic expression, the kind intended to appear apologetic but was actually condescending. "It means we need to verify additional information before proceeding." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "You mean my information? Because clearly, you didn't need to verify anything when that gentleman withdrew more than my requested amount." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but something in the way her jaw tensed indicated she wasn't accustomed to being challenged. "I cannot discuss other customers' transactions," she said, her tone growing sharper. "But in this instance, I'll need to confirm the source of these funds and verify your most recent deposit amount." Marcus felt his patience slip another degree. "You have my account number directly in front of you. Look it up." Victoria's expression hardened. "I'm going to need your cooperation, Mr. Bennet." Marcus laughed, short and incredulous. "Cooperation? I'm standing here, providing everything you need to perform your job, and you're still finding excuses to refuse me. That's not protocol. That's discrimination." The word struck the air like a physical blow. He witnessed it in the way Victoria's eyes flickered, how Amy stiffened behind her, how the room itself seemed to draw a breath, waiting for what would follow. Victoria's lips separated, then closed again as if carefully considering her next words. Then, without breaking eye contact with Marcus, she raised a single hand and made a small, sharp signal. Across the room, a figure stirred. Ethan Reynolds, the bank security officer, a broad-shouldered Caucasian man in his mid-30s, straightened from where he had been positioned near the entrance. His gaze moved toward Victoria, then to Marcus. He didn't pause. He began walking toward the counter. Marcus remained still as Ethan Reynolds approached, his heavy footsteps resonating against the polished flooring. The security officer was tall and imposing, the type of individual who carried his authority like credentials he never needed to display because people like him never had to prove their belonging. His expression was deliberately neutral, but his posture wasn't. Shoulders squared, hands relaxed at his sides, he moved with the slow, purposeful pace of someone preparing for an unwarranted confrontation. Victoria didn't bother acknowledging him. She didn't need to. The silent instruction had already been communicated. She maintained her focus on Marcus, waiting, observing. She anticipated compliance. They always did. Marcus released a slow breath, controlled and steady, keeping his expression neutral even as something heated coiled in his chest. He had witnessed this scenario play out too many times previously. A scene as ancient as time itself, a black man being treated as a threat in a space where he was supposed to belong. "I'm going to ask you once more," Victoria said, her voice still polished, still perfectly professional, as if she weren't actively orchestrating his removal. "Can you verify the source of these funds?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "My salary," he said evenly. "Like every other time I've deposited money into this account." Victoria tilted her head slightly, her eyes flicking to Amy, who stood rigid behind the counter with arms crossed. "And can you provide the exact amount of your last deposit?" Marcus stared at her. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in now. Other customers were pretending not to listen, Tellers were deliberately avoiding looking in his direction. Lisa Parker, the older Caucasian woman standing near the customer service desk, shifted uncomfortably, her grip tightening on her purse strap. She wanted to say something. He could see it in the way she fidgeted, how her mouth opened slightly before she decided, "Not my concern." Marcus dragged a slow hand down his face, exhaling through his nose. "You have my account number right in front of you," he said, forcing his voice to remain even and calm. "Why don't you access it?" Victoria's expression didn't change. "That's not our procedure here." A laugh, low and humorless, escaped Marcus's lips. "That's interesting," he said, "because I've banked here for years, and not once have I been asked these questions. Not once have I been treated like I don't belong." He took a step closer to the counter, his voice sharpening. "So tell me, Victoria, what exactly about me makes you think I don't?" Silence. Thick and suffocating. Amy's gaze flickered toward Victoria, uncertain now. Even she realized they had crossed the line from policy into something else entirely. But Victoria, she didn't flinch. If anything, the slight curve of her lips suggested she enjoyed the power she believed she held in this moment. Her gaze drifted past Marcus, a flick of the eyes that communicated more than words ever could. Ethan Reynolds stopped beside him, close enough that Marcus could sense his presence, a shadow looming just at the edge of his peripheral vision. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Ethan said, his voice flat and impersonal, as if Marcus were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, as if he weren't a customer at the very bank he had built. Marcus turned his head slowly, meeting the guard's eyes for the first time. He held his gaze, searching for any sign of awareness, of doubt, of hesitation. He found none. And yet he knew Ethan didn't make this decision. Victoria did. Amy did. All of them did. They had decided the moment he walked through those doors that he didn't belong, that he wasn't deserving of the same courtesy, the same trust, the same ease that had been extended to the man before him. The difference between them, skin color. Nothing else. And now they were removing him. Marcus inhaled once, deeply, then exhaled, his patience wearing thin by the second. He had played this game long enough. He reached into his pocket, slow and deliberate, and retrieved his phone. He unlocked the screen with a tap, raised it slightly, and pressed record. "You're refusing to process my withdrawal," he said, his voice calm but clear enough to carry, "despite having my identification, my account information, and despite processing an even larger withdrawal for a white customer immediately before me." Amy tensed. Victoria's jaw twitched. Ethan's stance stiffened. "I'm going to ask you again," Ethan said, his voice a shade less certain now. "Step outside." Marcus's grip tightened around his phone. "And if I don't—" Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached out. A firm hand wrapped around Marcus's forearm, fingers gripping with just enough pressure to make it clear he wasn't being asked anymore. Marcus barely had time to brace himself before he was jerked backward. His shoulder collided with Ethan's solid frame as the guard spun him toward the door, pushing him forward with just enough force to make him stumble. A sharp gasp broke through the silence. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" But no one intervened. His feet barely found traction before he was shoved again, this time harder, until his back struck the glass door. The impact sent a sharp shock up his spine, but Marcus didn't let it show. He refused to let them see it. The door swung open under the force, and the next thing he knew, he was outside. The cold morning air hit him like a slap. Behind him, Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking down at him with impassive disinterest. And then the final insult. His ID, the very thing they refused to acknowledge, the very thing that proved exactly who he was thrown to the ground at his feet. The small plastic card hit the pavement with a sharp, lifeless clatter. Something burned in Marcus's chest, something hot and raw, something dangerously close to the line between contained rage and outright fury. But before he could move, Before he could reach down, a shadow passed over him. A second security guard, Jamal Brooks, black, mid-30s, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes when he crouched down, when his fingers closed around the discarded ID, when he dusted it off with deliberate, almost reverent care before handing it back to Marcus. "This place," Jamal muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear, "always pulls this garbage." Marcus took the ID, his fingers brushing against Jamal's just briefly before the man pulled back. Jamal exhaled, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter if you have a degree, if you have the credentials, if you keep your head down and do everything right," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of too many years of quiet endurance. "They don't want us here. Not in the offices. Not at the top. We're security. We're custodians. We're the numbers they need to make it look like they care." He glanced back at Ethan, his expression filled with something between resignation and restrained disgust. "But this—" His voice dipped lower, "just for Marcus. This isn't new." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, heart still pounding, adrenaline still thick in his veins. Then slowly, he reached back into his pocket. He pulled out his phone again. But this time he wasn't recording. He was dialing. The line rang once, twice. Then David Carter's crisp voice answered. Marcus's grip tightened. "I need you at the Chicago branch. Now." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then a sharp inhale. "I'll be there in 15. Marcus ended the call, sliding his phone back into his pocket. His fingers curled around his ID, the edges pressing into his palm, grounding him, keeping the fury simmering beneath his skin from boiling over. His eyes flicked to Jamal, who was still standing beside him, hands on his hips, gaze flickering between Marcus and the glass doors, where Ethan remained stationed like a watchdog. Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. "Well," he muttered, shaking his head, "this is about to get really interesting." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The next 15 minutes stretched like hours. Inside, through the glass, he could see the bank continuing as if nothing had happened. Victoria was back behind the counter, speaking to Amy, her movements sharp, efficient, dismissive. Ethan remained by the door, arms crossed, eyes occasionally flicking toward Marcus but never holding his gaze for long. Lisa Parker had disappeared, probably deciding it was easier to remove herself than to witness something uncomfortable. Typical. Then, finally, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver barely had time to put it in park before the door swung open and David Carter stepped out. David was a man who commanded attention without asking for it. White, early 50s, salt and pepper hair, sharp suit, sharp eyes. Unlike the performative professionalism Marcus had faced inside, David's authority was real, earned, not projected. He didn't waste a second. The moment his gaze landed on Marcus, his expression tightened. Then he was moving. Ethan straightened as David approached, uncertainty flickering across his face. He must have recognized him, must have realized this wasn't just another customer, but David didn't even acknowledge the guard. He stepped right past him, the air in the bank shifting as the glass doors parted for him, his presence slicing through the tension like a blade. Marcus followed, his steps measured, controlled, though the heat of anticipation coiled in his chest. Jamal hesitated for only a second before trailing behind. The second Victoria turned and saw David, her expression flickered, something between confusion and realization. She straightened, smoothing down the front of her blazer, quickly composing herself. Amy, standing just behind her, went rigid. "Mr. Carter," Victoria greeted, her voice forcibly even, her professional mask slipping into place. "I wasn't expecting—" David didn't give her the chance to finish. "Clearly," his tone was cold, cutting, "because if you had been, this wouldn't be happening." Victoria's lips parted and closed. A shadow of discomfort passed over her face, but she recovered quickly. "Sir, there seems to be some misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," David cut in smoothly, his gaze shifting briefly to Marcus before locking back onto her. "The only thing I'm confused about is why my CEO was just forcibly removed from his own bank." A dead silence fell over the room. Amy visibly paled. Ethan stiffened by the door. Even the tellers who had been pretending not to listen froze mid-transaction. Victoria blinked. Then blinked again. For the first time, her perfectly composed expression faltered. Her mouth opened. A second too late. "Save it," David said, voice like steel. His gaze flicked to Amy. "You refused his transaction." Amy's throat bobbed. "I was just following protocol." "Protocol," David echoed, his tone edged with disbelief. He let the word settle, let it stretch into the silence. "Is that what we're calling blatant racial profiling now?" Amy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. David didn't wait for an answer. His attention snapped back to Victoria. "Tell me, Victoria," he said, slow, deliberate, measured. "Did you even check his account before you decided he wasn't qualified to access his own money?" Victoria inhaled sharply, her composure finally cracking. "Sir, yes or no?" David's voice was quiet. "Lethal." Victoria hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. David exhaled through his nose, a slow, calculated breath. Then he looked around the room, at Amy, at Ethan, at the tellers who had watched and said nothing. He let the silence stretch, let it smother them under the weight of what had just been exposed. Then, finally, "You're done here." Victoria went rigid. "Sir, effective immediately," David continued as if she hadn't spoken. "And if I find out this kind of treatment has been happening to other customers," his gaze flicked to Ethan, "or if any employee under my leadership thinks they can use their position to enforce their own biases," he let the sentence hang, unfinished, the threat embedded in the silence, "you won't just lose your job. You'll answer for it legally." Ethan had the decency to look away. Victoria's face flushed deep red, a stark contrast to the icy confidence she had held just minutes ago. "This is completely unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice sharp, incredulous. "You had me thrown out like a criminal. You refused to even look at my ID, refused to check your own system. You knew exactly what you were doing." Victoria flinched. David turned back to Marcus then, his expression shifting, apology flickering in his eyes, though he knew words wouldn't fix what had already happened. He nodded, firm, then turned to Jamal. "And you, David?" asked. Jamal stiffened. "Sir." David studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You're promoted. Effective today." Jamal's eyes widened, caught off guard, his stance shifting. "You deserve better than working under people like this," David said simply, then turned back to Marcus. "Marcus," he said, the familiarity in his voice standing in stark contrast to the cold authority he had used with Victoria. "You want this branch cleaned out?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Completely." David nodded once. Then, as if the decision had already been made, he turned back to the stunned employees. "Everyone involved in this incident is to be reported for bias training. Mandatory." His gaze lingered on Ethan. "That includes security." The weight of his words settled over the room like a final nail in the coffin. Victoria opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Marcus exhaled, slow, steady. Then, without another glance at her, he stepped forward, reclaiming his place at the counter. Amy stepped aside immediately. David gestured toward the computer. "Process his withdrawal." This time, no one dared argue. The crisp stacks of bills were counted out, placed neatly in front of Marcus. His money, his, Not something to be debated, not something to be justified. Just his. As he took the cash, his gaze flicked to Jamal. The man was still standing there, looking slightly dazed, as if trying to process everything that had just unfolded. Marcus slid one of the stacks toward him. Jamal frowned. "Sir." Marcus held his gaze. "Take the day off." Jamal hesitated, then slowly reached for the cash, fingers curling around the bills. Marcus turned, finally meeting Victoria's gaze one last time. "You should have checked my ID," he said. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. This time, no one stopped him. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.